This week's edition of Friday Shares is dedicated to managing video chats. I know that a lot of you have been hosting video chats with your students to connect with them, and I think that that's great. I also have been hearing about the challenges of this process, getting kids to show up, making sure they are doing good work when in the video chat, and when, in certain cases, when you are not running the video chat, but asking students to run their own, making sure that they're doing it and that they're doing it in the way you want them to. So I have three examples for you. The first is from Jen's fiction class, the second is from Glenda's graphic design class, and the third is from Allison's bioethics class. This first example from Jen's fiction class is a great tip for when you're trying to get students to hold their own video chats without you. Jen has assigned each student to one of four groups. There are four students in each group, and you can see here that in each group, each student is going to be assigned a role. And so there are four roles: leader, sorry about that, timer, recorder, and question summarizer. The leader's job is to decide how they're going to run the workshop of each student's pieces and is in charge of starting it off by greeting everyone and checking in. The timer is meant to make sure that each student's piece that's being workshopped in this group gets the proper amount of time and that the meeting doesn't go over Jen's suggested allotment of an hour. The recorder is meant to take a screenshot of this hangout to post to a wiki project in the course, and the question summarizer is meant to add a note to that wiki project with some summary of how the hangout went. Jen is accomplishing a lot of things by assigning this role. First of all, she's giving the students some personal investment in the Hangout. She is also making sure that she's taking care of that accountability piece. All Jen will need to do after the due date is check the wiki project to see if the students had the Hangout and did their job. And I think this is a great, very efficient way to make sure that independent group work is happening in the way Jen wants it to. In graphic design, Glenda does two things that I like. First of all, she took something from our medical problem solving course earlier in the fall and used it in her class, which I think is great. And then she also did something on her own, which I think is great. Here's Glenda's content block for the Google Hangout, and you can see, as usual, Glenda does a lovely job graphically representing what she wants students to do. And here, you can see that she is giving them a very clear plan for how this is going to work. She's asking students to be ready to answer all questions. She is going to call on people randomly, and she's going to ask them to use examples to explain and illustrate understanding. This idea of randomly calling on students came from the medical problem solving course. The teachers of that class loved this tactic because all the students came prepared. And Glenda told me in a recent conversation we had that it was the same way for her. By telling all the students that they were going to be accountable for all the information and they weren't going to know what questions were going to come their way, the students showed up super prepared. The other thing that Glenda did that I really liked is that she, as you should in all Hangouts, had an icebreaker. And prior to the Hangout, she says here, she's going to be asking one student to lead the icebreaker. So when the video chat actually happened, Glenda allowed the students to just interact without her for the first 5 minutes while she got ready. One student led the icebreaker, walked the students through a getting to know you exercise. Glenda was able to assemble her notes, maybe work with a student who couldn't get on board right away, and she had that cushion of time to be ready and run a really effective Hangout. The only other side note I would add to this is look how many instructions Glenda has provided. This is really important for a video chat. Students feel a little awkward and a little unsure when joining a video chat, especially for the first time. It's not a format they're used to. Setting their expectations and giving clear instructions is a great way to hit the ground running once the Hangout starts. The last example I would share is from Allison's bioethics class. She is planning a hangout with her students based on a case study about meningococcal disease, and she's asking them to read an article and come to the discussion prepared to sign up for it. What's interesting here is that Allison, who's a veteran GOA teacher, this is her third time through this, knows that there's always going to be some sort of issue where students can't make it or technology gets in the way or whatever reason. There's always two or three students that just can't make it happen. And usually when that happens, it becomes a chasing game. I got to get this kid in, I got to find him, I got to have a separate hangout. Allison has done something really interesting here. She has said to students that If you cannot attend any of the planned synchronous class sessions, you must write your answers to the discussion questions and submit your answers to the class Dropbox. So Allison here is saying, if you're not going to make the effort to show up and meet the class, then you've got a writing assignment. And she does two things here, which I like. The first is, I feel like students would rather show up to a video chat than write an essay. And the second thing she's doing is building in that accountability piece. She is not going to spend her time chasing students if she doesn't have to. She is going to say, all right, you didn't show up, do your writing assignment, I'll give you some feedback on it, and we'll move on, and you'll show up at the next video chat. And this is a really manageable, effective way, I think, to make this synchronous connection component of your class manageable. Try to make sure that you've got a backup plan for those students who just, for whatever reason, can't show up to your video chat. That's it. Those are my 3 examples for you. Before I go, I wanted to share one last thing that I saw at this conference, which I love. They have hired these 2 people for major presentations here. They're called graphic note takers or something like that. And it's 2 women who stand up on stage and they have enormous pieces of butcher paper basically up on the wall. And as the speaker is talking, they design these huge graphic maps as visual representations of notes for the workshop. And I think it's a really interesting technique. I've seen Glenda, for instance, just do it on her own. And it reminded me of something I heard at a conference that I went to a couple months ago, which is when you really want to demonstrate understanding, diagram it. And I would encourage you to think about this idea of visual representation as a way to demonstrate understanding. If students can diagram something, if you can challenge yourself or your students to visually show their understanding, it actually is sort of a higher order thinking than just doing bullet points or writing down notes. I can speak from personal experience that when I try to diagram something or diagram my notes from a workshop, it's much harder. And so this is something to think about for an exercise maybe in your classes. Ask students to try to visually represent what they do. Have a great weekend, everybody. I look forward to talking to you all soon about your surveys. As always, if you have questions or want to see more examples, just let me know. Thanks.